again, everybody. I suppose the most obvious thing to say is that there isn't one single future of development education, but many possibilities. I suppose one of the things I want us to think about here is really the question of whose interests are being served by the increasing emphasis that's being placed on global citizenship as a concept or as a set of competencies or dispositions by international organizations. So I'm talking here about organizations such as the OECD, which is essentially an economic think tank, or sometimes referred to as the Rich Club of Nations. So why would an organization like the OECD be suddenly very interested in global competencies? And I'm looking at this question from the perspective of somebody who works within the formal educational sector. So I work in teacher education, primarily initial teacher education at primary level, and I've previously worked in initial teacher education at second level. So my comments are kind of directed in that direction. And it was one of the things that's most striking to me is that the status of development education has been elevated considerably within that sector within the last 5 years alone in ways that we couldn't have really thought possible. So I know that many of the people in this room have done incredible Trojan work, as part of that process. But just by way of example, we now have global citizenship named as a core element within teacher professional standards. So we have this document that we call the CAME document within teacher education, which is, the set of standards that as a teacher you have to uphold, and our teacher education institutions are judged on the basis of the extent to which we conform and uphold these standards. And it's remarkable that global citizenship now constitutes one of 7 core elements within that. The profile of global citizenship education within schools is radically enhanced. It was recently announced that there's a new subject, Leaving Cert subject, in climate action and sustainability. We have those new curriculum developments. We also have a new subject in politics and society. All of these developments are, of course, linked to the broader SDG agenda and the need for global indicators of SDG 4.7 in particular. So we have these, really interesting developments, and we also have an increasing emphasis on global citizenship or global competencies within organizations such as the OECD, who've become really interested in the kind of non-cognitive domains of learning. So previously the focus was very much on literacy, numeracy, but increasingly they're interested in things like, all this touchy-feely stuff like the social and emotional learning and global citizenship. So we have this kind of a mainstreaming of global citizenship education, which it presents incredible opportunities, but it also presents challenges to the extent that it's a particular framing of global citizenship. So we all know that global citizenship is a very contested term, and that there are multiple and competing and sometimes fundamentally incompatible versions of what it means to be a global citizen. And I suppose from a justice perspective that the previous speakers have foregrounded and spoken so eloquently about, I have concerns about the framing of global citizenship as a set of competencies or a set of, it essentially boils down to viewing global citizenship as a set of skills that need to be honed, rather than, I suppose, an orientation to the world that is premised on social justice, that's premised on political and ethical responsibility, and that is, grounded in an attempt to repair the world. Rather, what we're seeing is a vision of global citizenship which does nothing to really counter this broken economic system that Ikai spoke of. So economic growth tends to be assumed as a norm, and it's really about preparing people, certain kinds of people rather, to be able to effectively navigate a changing workplace, a rapidly changing workplace in a world that's increasingly dominated by AI and so on, and having the cultural fluency to interact with people from diverse backgrounds. But if you look at, there's a very interesting paper that looks at the genealogy of global citizenship and global competencies within the OECD and how that came to be and who was involved in those discussions. There was zero representation from the global South. So it's a very particular type of framing, it's a very particular type of way of thinking about what global citizenship means and what it should be. And I suppose the vision of global citizenship that I want to promote is one that is much more nuanced, it's much more complex, and it's one that has social justice at its core. And for me, what that increasingly requires is an attention to not just the kind of cognitive or epistemological or knowledge-based aspects of global citizenship, but a focus on the affective or the emotional, okay? And so, something like the climate crisis is really bringing into sharp relief the extent to which we need to foreground emotion within global citizenship education. And my concern is, if we look at how certain organizations are framing the emotional, it tends to be highly individualized, highly reductive, and is really about change at the individual level, okay? So I'm talking here about organizations such as UNESCO, the Mahatma Gandhi Institute, whose remit is SDG 4.7 and global citizenship. If you look at the interventions that are being developed there, the focus is very much about individual change. So to the extent that social and emotional learning is embraced, it's looking at cultivating compassion, cultivating mindfulness, cultivating critical thinking. But it's all about change at the individual level. And as everybody has been saying here today, I mean, global citizenship education is fundamentally about systems change. It's about structural change. And my concern has to do with the lack of room. If you're privileging and prioritizing a very individualized understanding of how social change and social transformation occurs, it's what's being removed from that dialogue or that discussion. So just a word of, I suppose, caution in terms of these kinds of framings, because these organizations are very powerful. They kind of set the terms of how these things are discussed, how they're enacted, and how we teach and learn, essentially. So I think my time is almost up, so I could go on, but I'll stop for now. Thank you.